Alright, welcome back to Game 10 of Lucid's 2022 tournament, where we are playing Phlegra. It is turn 48. We're fighting against Atlantis, and we have some super combatants in play. Though I do not have high confidence in what we have set up. Definitely need to rethink a few things. We finished research in Evocation 7. If I'm remembering correctly, this is for Firestorm, and then we're headed back on the Alteration train. Kind of Will of the Fates, and maybe eventually Army of Gold, Army of Lead. Kind of standard stuff, nothing special there. We have a throne claim. Not actually sure who this is offhand. Should definitely double check the throne situation. I don't think anyone is too close. We are definitely getting to the point where, some people might get close and we might see some throne rushes. Bringing in a few green lions. We are starting to get low on our water gems, as we are trying to also use those for our armor, since we are going up against Atlantis, expecting a lot of cold stuff. Yeah, we have a lot of raids this turn. Okay, let's see. This is the one we're going to try to get this guy to fly. Let's see, did he give it to himself? Yeah, I was worried about this. I probably should have given him 2 gems. So, yeah, he gave Gift of Flight to himself. Unfortunately, since these guys are size 6, it's just not possible, to put anybody in the same square with them to buff. I think this is a 1 square buff. So yeah, and I think he's set to retreat, so that's great. He gives himself flight to make sure that he can get out of there. That's kind of in character for those guys. I feel like, anybody that's putting oppressor headbands on people, they're probably not great humans. So we use the death gem on some corpse candles, which is kind of interesting. This guy is definitely going a bit off script. I guess he decided that Soul Vortex was not. We may have not actually scripted Soul Vortex. I'm kind of curious what he chose to cast, because he is set to attack. I was a little worried I hadn't set him to attack. The undead also not part of the script, so I have no idea what happened there, why he felt the need to go off of his script. I think it was things like Fire Shield, Temper Flesh, like pretty normal stuff. But still, he's got regeneration. You can see his protection's not that high. Actually higher than I thought, so he did go through some of his script, I guess. It's probably the crossbows. Yeah. Probably should forge more of the shields that provide air shield for them, because we're going to be going up against a lot of crossbows in the PD. And I know that Atlantis does have at least 1 stack of independent crossbows, and probably will be recruiting more. Okay, so yeah, here we have another guy. Another Gift of Flight? No, okay. So let's see. This is Iron Will? Yeah. Oh, no. He cast Resist Cold on himself. Fantastic. And he retreated. So I believe this guy was supposed to be casting Iron Warriors, which, if I'm recalling correctly, is an Earth 2 spell. And that is what the gem is for. So I guess he felt that this tyrant, had high enough natural protection, and that he also didn't want to cast it on himself and went with Resist Cold instead. Or, oh, you know what? It's probably not enough here to trigger gem usage. Yeah. Okay, that makes a little more sense. So we should come away against this minimal PD. But yeah, our efforts to, do a little bit of point buffing on our tyrants, not going great so far. And yeah, here we have sort of a medium commitment army. We run into some stuff here, some mages. This could be a problem. These thugs, we don't really have a ton that can kill them. You have to say their mobility actually is much higher than I expected. I thought Atlanteans were relatively slow. I mean, he does have some mobility boots on him. I don't think we have any reloads. No, we had reloads. So we do have some air elementals. Air elementals are probably our best bet. And depending on if this guy has any shock resistance. Yeah, he does not have any shock resistance. So yeah, we have decent chances, assuming our mages don't get sniped, which looking a little scary. We only have like 2 or 3 mages here, and there is a lot of chaff for us to cut through. Unfortunately, our air elementals went in early and kind of fought by themselves. So the timing on that, not perfect, and so yeah, we're going to be relying on the shock damage. And I'm not sure we're going to win the chaff battle either. There's been a little bit of point buffing on Atlantis' side. Our Mouflon are generally better, but yeah, I think there's just too much in the way of numbers. This was a relatively obvious raid, so I was a little bit worried. I thought we'd brought enough stuff out that we could punch through, because a lot of this is like pretty trashy garbage. But yeah, the Mouflon just not quite enough to cut our way through. We do have a Tyrant behind this, so the Tyrant should be able to break through. But still, that is bad news for us. Yeah, wow, we actually mostly just killed Province Defense, so that was extremely painful. Let's see. Our mages do at least retreat successfully, so not the end of the world. I mean, we don't have a ton of Mouflon, and we're not really making money anymore since the tyrants. Their upkeep is pretty astronomical. I really have no idea. I mean, it's like, this is the nation where it's the super combatant with a nation attached to it. Yeah, no defense here. That makes sense. So Atlantis doing a good job of not bothering to defend against the tyrants. It'd be interesting to see if they try to magic phase out some answers. I think a lot of these guys don't necessarily have... Okay, yeah, no, we've been giving them amulets of anti-magic. They can also cast Iron Will on themselves, so we have pretty respectable magic resistance, but Atlantis definitely has Astral. I don't think they have a lot of like Astral 3s, which is what you need to teleport out, so we probably don't have to worry too much about like a teleporting Soul Slay squad. So yeah, that one works out for us, but again, like, yeah, we're not really... We do want to be dealing damage. Taking provinces is nice. Yeah, here we have another guy, another friend. This guy does not have to use a gem to cast the buff, so that's pretty important. And he did get it successfully on the tyrant, so there you go. 1 for 3 here with our point buffing. Perhaps have to use like more of these mages. Unfortunately for our national mages, other than like our cap onlys who we're not even recruiting anymore, like they require a communion, right, to do any kind of buffing without the gems. That's why we're trying to hand out a gem, but then it's like, well, they're set to retreat because there's no way they're going to survive if we run into any resistance. But it's like, yeah, I don't know. then they're not in the same province. Like, yeah, it's gonna be a real pain. And then it's like, if we have to put a communion together, then that's like 3 mages that have to survive the retreat at minimum. But yeah, anyway, this one's gonna work out. But yeah, in terms of like, well, how many tyrants should we really be recruiting? It kind of seems like, well, as many as we can get our hands on. But it is pretty crippling. We'll probably be forced in the not too distant future to just stop recruiting tyrants, because if we don't start taking a lot more territory, we cannot keep up with our upkeep just skyrocketing like this, or losing tyrants. Right? I guess that's an alternate route we could go. No province defense here. So we are at least taking a lot of... Oops, that's the wrong one. Let's see. Yeah, this works out for us. We are taking a lot of territory. We had the one battle fail, where we lost some chaff. Luckily, our expensive mages, yeah, here's our pretender jumping in. Also, no province defense. So yeah, Atlantis, defending heavily in a few areas and then just not bothering to defend at all in other areas. I think that is a reasonable strategy. They are, of course, in a 2v1 right now, so, that's a pretty tough situation. And I mean, that's part of why we went into this situation. We talked before, like, Atlantis was our other big target. It actually, like, attacking Atlantis basically saved us. I think I missed the message, or I don't know, maybe I'll show it. Or maybe I will have shown it in a previous episode, but Mictlan actually ended their non-aggression pact with us, and then they found out that we were attacking Atlantis, and they're like, actually, that's fine, you do that, we can keep the non-aggression pact. So we were about to have to fight Mictlan, but the fact that we attacked Atlantis means that we don't have to. Atlantis was less than thrilled that we were attacking, obviously, but particularly they felt that it wasn't a wise decision, because they feel that they're at the height of their power, which I think there's some truth to that. Like, Atlantis, I think, is considered more of like an army-focused nation. They have Wailing Winds up, Wind of Death, all that kind of stuff, so they're maybe strongest in the mid-game. Whereas, like, Mictlan, being a blood nation, stereotypically is strongest at the end of the game, right? So they felt that I should be fighting against Mictlan rather than them. But it kind of looks like Mictlan has made peace with Vedheim, or Vedheim is, pretty much done, because they've been fighting like 3 people or something, 3 or 4 people for a while. So I think we would have had a 1v1 Mictlan more or less, and I would take a 2v1 against Atlantis over a 1v1 versus Mictlan, especially considering that the Mictlan player is supposed to be pretty good. The Atlantis player may be pretty good as well. I feel like they've been doing decent stuff so far. Like, I don't think their play has been bad, but again, 2v1 versus 1v1, and I don't really know Late Age all that well, so the national matchups, I have no idea. This is an Olmish thug here who should be able to come away with this. Yeah, he's got no kit, so it probably will take him a second. But, he's got Life Drain built in, I believe, and he is immortal, so if it goes poorly, that is fine for Ulm, but it doesn't go poorly, so Ulm manages to take a province. And then speaking of Vedheim, they are getting attacked by Utgard, among others, no doubt. This is just a ping. Did he find anything? Not really. This looks like mostly like Fort PD. We had some unexpected events. Let's see, some extra blood slaves. That's nice. We get some unrest, lose a little population. That's kind of just standard for our lands. We find the lair of a troll, skull staff. That's pretty nice. And a goodly amount of gems. So yeah, we'll take that, definitely. Then we actually moved our army out on top of this fort, so moderately damaged. It does look like there's some stuff inside, because we moved a decent amount of stuff. We don't have amazing siege strength since we've taken a lot of chaff losses. But it's entirely possible that Atlantis' magic phase moved in some troops, and I do think some troops snuck in before we jumped on top of it. We had some disease curing, which is nice. Like, yeah, a lot of our human mages are just in a rough place. And we have some patrolling, and I'll catch you guys after the cut. All right, this was the situation and what we did about it. This turn, switching over completely to the defensive, which I think is reasonable. We did take a lot of provinces last turn, and we can also see that Atlantis has organized a lot of responses, potentially looking to be on the defensive, but there's definitely some pretty large stacks here with at least some mage support. We see another army coming south, we're assuming, probably to try to knock us off of this fortification, but also potentially just to stop our raiding. Also of note, it looks like all of Atlantis' army has moved back on top of this Olmish fortification, since we don't see anything on Atlantis' unforted throne. So we're not defending everywhere. In the north here, we're not going to defend either of these provinces, but we are collapsing a good amount of stuff, 2 super combatants, and our pretender. Slightly mixed in terms of the script. We have 1 tyrant set to advance and cast spells, the other one set to attack. Our pretender is also set to attack rear. She'll actually be able to get to the rear in all likelihood because she can fly. This guy, no flight, so probably won't make it. Relatively similar in terms of kit. Yeah, we've talked through this kit before. Slightly different kit for this tyrant. We do have this shocking shield, which is pretty nice. A little on the expensive side at 10 gems. Not nearly as good for crowd control, something like a vine shield. But it is just an excellent shield, and being able to shock is really nice. Extra, threat vector, and will stun some units. So not great crowd control, but potentially a little bit. Also in the category of not great crowd control, but potentially a little bit, we have this Star of Thraldom. And it has an area of effect, false fetters, so magic resistance can negate it, but at least it's for the whole square. Again, not nearly as good as something like a vine shield, but will hopefully help out a bit. It's also only 5 gems, air gems, which is a type that we have enough of. So not a terrible weapon, but certainly not as good at clearing out squares as the brands. This guy also a little low on the magic resistance. We have given him an Amulet of Resilience, but we have not actually set him to use Phoenix Pyre, which we do have available, so that potentially is an oversight. Generally, Reinvigoration is good on super combatants in general, and of course the Tyrants don't have feat slots, so one of the main ways that you can get Reinvigoration is through Boots of the Messenger. Not an option for these guys. So I don't hate it, but I do think that this is a fairly expensive item. We don't have a ton of nature gems, so since we're not really utilizing it for Phoenix Pyre, I feel like this is not the best choice in retrospect. That's really just, the magic resistance at 18 is not fantastic. We are trying to offset this a little bit with the Crown of Lead. I think we're in magic scales, yeah, so our resistance is a little bit lower than it would normally be. But of course, magic resistance is always a big concern for these guys. Our pretender with slightly different kit, no crown or boots, unfortunately. Really should have the pretender fully kitted. No excuse for that one. Otherwise, though, I think overall relatively reasonable kitting. We do have much higher magic resistance here. Dancing Shield, of course, is fantastic in terms of physical protection. The Chainmail Displacement, she does have fairly good defense skill in general, so boosting that I think is not unreasonable. So anyway, we'll see how that goes. A little bit concerned that Atlantis is going to try to collapse, all of these forces here, and then maybe combine everything that would collapse onto this province with what we see marching to the south here. And both of those forces combined, I think, could be a serious problem for our army here that's sieging down this fort. So hopefully we'll be able to knock that out with our combined super combatant group. So that's really the only defense that we have set up in the north. In the south, we're also setting up a defense, though I think it's somewhat unlikely that this is the group that just turned around our air elemental raiding group. So we're bringing some stuff up, including a tyrant. We're bringing a ring of water breathing, which, as we've discussed, is not actually required for these guys, but yeah, did not realize that at the time. So we are planning on sending this guy to raid underwater. We can really only raid underwater right now, so that's not ideal. But otherwise, bringing up our crossbowmen, this is a heavy raiding group. Certainly not enough to take a fort, but should be enough, right, to punch through this choke point and hopefully give us some more raiding options. There's also some possibility that we get attacked in some other locations. I think we're pretty much giving up this province here, moving our tyrant out, but we are shifting our tyrants laterally. Like I said, the tyrants, right, they're not going to be able to reduce these citadels, but if we can get them loose in some of Atlantis's lands here, there's a lot of unforted territory, over farther to the east. And of course, potentially we might catch some raiders with these tyrants shifting around. Definitely some danger from this army. This is enough siege strength that they could certainly come for our fort here in Peacehaven. And we really don't have anything here. Right? We have an absolutely minimal communion and no troops. So we are at least moving in, some more mages, so larger communion, giving some air gems. So I'm assuming the plan here is to summon air elementals. They're not going to need to do so this turn. We do at least have good province defense investment here. And we kind of have an army to the north forming up. So we've recruited some infantry, and we just have our patrollers, a few crossbowmen, and a decent number of Yetis. Yeah, there aren't really even any Mouflon. We're sending some Mouflon to the capital to link up with some other Mouflon that we've recruited. In terms of troop recruitment, it's just a few Mouflon in the capital, right? This is, of course, a turn that we're recruiting a tyrant. Speaking of recruitment, definitely missing mage recruitment. Let's see, we have one there, but I think, we're missing one here. Probably not the only place that we're missing. We're mostly recruiting foreign mages, honestly, at this point. Our foreign mage recruitment is fairly strong. Like, we're getting throne mages from both of the thrones we control. But in terms of our national mages, we're mostly just recruiting the shackled mages. Right, and that's just in anticipation of, burning out some communions. Also somewhat just a question of, kind of what we can afford right now. So that covers it in terms of, our war plans and kind of what we're seeing from Atlantis. In terms of what's going on in the wider world, I don't think too much has changed. Something of note is that, we know that Vedheim has been struggling a bit as they fight off their various, 2v1, 4v1, whatever they're in. I think right now it's at about a 2v1, but Vedheim's capital is here, and we can see that Utgard's in their cap circle, so that's never a good sign. Now, it does look like this might be kind of some deep raiding, potentially, because we see a lot of other Vedheim flags. But, it's never good to have an enemy in your cap circle. Also of note, this army from Marignan that I thought would have to reconstitute for a little while, they've cracked this fortification from Vedheim. So we've seen Vedheim put up some pretty impressive fort defenses, but not against Marignan yet, I think. So we'll see the result of that next turn. I think that more or less covers that. We don't really see Utgard fighting anyone else. I mean, really, Atlantis ourselves or Marignan are their only other options. Marignan also seems to only be fighting Vedheim currently. Obviously, we more or less know what Ulm is up to, and I would say that things are still not going fantastic for Ulm. I feel like they're probably down in provinces. We still see some Atlantean flags somewhat deep in their territory. On the other hand, they haven't lost any forts yet. And this fortification's not cracked. We know there's a good amount of stuff in here for Ulm. So I would say that this war is still very much in the balance. And then, Mictlan is still a question mark in terms of, what they're going to be up to. So I think that more or less covers turn 48. Of course, this is the start of year 4. So it's time for a tour of the F keys. So currently we're at about 29 provinces, which is not terrible, but, not great. Notable that, we only have the one capital, and that's definitely pretty significant. I also think that this is a good turn for us to be doing this count. You can see from the site searching, right? So these are probably all provinces that we've grabbed from Atlantis. And they may have something to say about that in the coming turns. Speaking of site searching, overall, we've done a pretty good job covering our territory, but the level at which we're searching often has been very low. You can see we've only searched Water 1 anywhere. And of course, our nature searching has pretty much only been by our pretender. In fact, yeah, I think it's only been by our pretender. This 3 must have been searched after they lost that path of nature when we called them back. We do, of course, have some nature indies, so probably should have been searching that, in some of the other places with them. And definitely would have been nice to get some remote site searching, particularly I think Astral would be really useful for that, and maybe, get some boosters on people and get, some water site searching going. We can see that, we're starting to get some death site searching going, but that is pretty tough for us. Also of note, I think it's worth looking, at the unrest column here. And you can see that, pretty much in all locations, right? In fact, yeah, we don't have a single province, right, that's at no unrest. That's just a feature of late-age Phlegra. On the other hand, you can see that the unrest is generally pretty low, despite the fact that we have turmoil and despite the fact, that we have not been bothering with Phlegran priests. So not saying priests aren't worth it. It's probably worth exploring a bit more. But, you can see that the unrest, even when you kind of ignore it, right, we've been doing a little bit of patrolling. But otherwise, haven't really been doing too much to try to mitigate this. It doesn't really ever get that bad. And like I said, in my limited testing with the Phlegran priests, is pretty difficult to get a province to 0. Of course, there definitely are plenty of provinces that are kind of nasty in terms of their unrest, right? But, this belt down here, every time you conquer a province, just generates some unrest. So I think that's, most of what this is. These are provinces that we've taken from Atlantis recently. And then, of course, we are running Misfortune 3. So, something like this 29, 27, these are probably from unrest events. Of note, this 102, this is a province that we've taken off of Atlantis. There's a monster boar here. So anyway, unrest, always interesting to look at for, Phlegra and this line of nations because it is something you need to consider. Now we'll take a quick look at our graphs here. So, you can see that we've been pretty stagnant for a long time, right? Really for half of the game. And, that's not great. Now we've had a good, turn or two here. You can see our province count kind of skyrocketing. But, like I said, I think that this is going to be contested. We at least have not lost any forts, maybe have too many forts, but, it's always nice to have more forts. It's just a question of, what have we given up to have those forts? Still, you never want to see that graph go down. Income, of course, is going to track pretty closely to province count, so you can see that, more or less we've stagnated. A bit of an increase here at the end, but not as, steep as you might think. Gem income, of course, pretty similar story, though a greater spike here. So we at least got some gem-bearing provinces, it looks like. Our research, I would say, is good, but not stellar, right? We don't see any kind of crazy acceleration. We are making lanterns, but relatively slowly. We do want fire gems for other things. And of course, you can see a slight dip here that just occurred. So, every time we're going to war, we're mobilizing more mages, right? You can see a couple of dips previously in our graph when we end up mobilizing more mages. So a pretty standard story. Dominion is going down, which is not good, but, not really super important for us. Really, the main thing here is we want to make sure that we have our Dominion in locations, in forts where we have a lot of mages researching because we have magic scales. So that's definitely important, but otherwise we don't really care too much about our Dominion yet. Certainly we don't want to get into a situation where somebody can really punish us with one of the late game globals that have nasty effects. If you're an enemy Dominion, army size is a pretty rough loss against Utgard here. And of course, not our only losses. We still have not covered in terms of raw numbers from that loss to Utgard. On the other hand, I think that occurred before we had any tyrants, certainly a lot fewer tyrants, right? So the army size graph is not the whole story, right? Never the whole story. It just tells you the raw numbers, which is useful, but I would certainly take a tyrant over 100 of our archers. In terms of ascension points, Ulm is actually, tied, it looks like. Tied with Atlantis, actually. We are in third, it looks like. Yes, that is correct. So it's still a bit early, I think, for a throne rush. But it's perhaps a little bit concerning, right, that we are assisting. I'm assuming that this is Ulm. Yes, this is Ulm. And then so Atlantis has just recently made a claim, so now they're tied. So the fact that we're fighting against Atlantis, that's good. We've talked about how there's thrones on offer for us to pick up. But the fact that we're working with the other nation, right, that has the most thrones is a little concerning in retrospect. This is not something I looked at the time. Now that said, right, we are hoping to pick up at least one throne off of Atlantis, but definitely there are some thrones on the border between Ulm and Atlantis. So, this is something to consider when planning out your wars, right? Even if you would profit from a 2v1, if you're setting someone up for victory, that's a problem. So we'll see in coming turns if this ends up biting us. And here we have the Hall of Fame. I don't think this has actually changed all that much. It looks like the majority of them are actually dead. So no, it hasn't really been a game of like super combatants and heavy thugs. Definitely of note, like only our prophet is up here. So we are hoping to get some tyrants into this list. And it certainly looks like there is space for them, considering how many dead heroes there are. So hopefully by next year, this list will have changed a bit. And here we have the Pretenders of the World. I don't think this list has changed too much. Gath was recently defeated. I think that happened within the last year. Potentially Raga. I know they were holding on for a while. But yeah, we still have a lot of players left. I would say, of the people that are still alive, everybody's still in it. Vedheim is perhaps in the worst position, potentially followed by us. But yeah, like I said, I don't think anybody's going to be exiting super soon. And here we are at research. We've talked about where we're at in terms of research and where we're going. Research rate is actually, decent. Definitely getting assisted by the Magic 3. But we've certainly recruited plenty of mages, so not stellar research, but certainly good enough. And here we are at global enchantments. Also been kind of a low global enchantment game, right? Only Mother Oak up currently. And that's for Utgard. I mean, that's it, right? There's really nothing to say here other than not that many global enchantments. Of course, perhaps this is a function, right, of it being late age and there just being less gems to go around. So again, I play a lot of early age, so this looks pretty rough to me, but, it's hard to say. Certainly, we've no gem type that's in the double digits. That's notable because I feel like usually by this point in the game, in earlier ages, I usually manage to have at least one gem type into the double digits. Our death income has increased a ton, but I feel like Atlantis gets a decent amount of death, so some of this is probably because we've picked up some provinces from them and are benefiting from their site searching. And of course, our Earth income is still, sadly, quite low. And here we have our forged gear that's hanging out. Not too much sitting around, which is good. Otherwise, not too much of note. We do have a midget masher here, so this potentially could be useful later on to give to our tyrants. They are size 6, so anything that's not size 6 is smaller than them, and they'll be able to deal out a lot of damage. So, we may need to pull this out again if we ever fight against Utgard again. Not a ton of boosters right now, so, that's not great. You always like to have more boosters. And here we have the exact throne situation, so we can see that, Ulm and Atlantis are indeed tied, but they're only at 6 ascension points. You need 12, so they're only halfway there. So from a throne perspective, I feel like this is still anyone's game. And that concludes our tour of the F keys, and I remembered there is one other thing of note. Our latest tyrant that we recruited was an air random. This is extremely rare and quite lucky. All right, this opens up Wind of Death as well as Wailing Winds for us. So this is not a random you can really count on with your tyrants, but it certainly is possible, and we have gotten one. And with that, we'll conclude our yearly review.